everyone. This is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the MuseScore Café. This is my regular series I do on Wednesdays where we talk about some aspect of using MuseScore. And usually there's a theme for the week that we use, and I talk about that topic, take some questions, discuss, and so forth. And the topic for today is time signatures and things relating to time. And I just picked this because whatever, this is the time changed for the the daylight savings time, so time's on my mind, so we're going to talk about time. So thanks everyone here checking in and letting us know where you're coming from. So I just want to kind of get started here and talk about some things having to do with time. So the very first thing that we'll want to do is know that when you create a score, you can pick an initial time signature and pickup measure. And yeah, Arizona doesn't do daylight savings time. Is Indiana not either? Is anyone in Indiana? I know it used to not. I don't know if they finally started doing it. But so when I said that people in the U.S. don't have to worry about a change, I should have said people in the U.S. other than Arizona. Anyhow, glad that people managed to find us with the current time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new score and, Control N to hit my new score. And I'm just going to pick some instruments. Hawaii doesn't. I was wondering about that too, actually. So I'm going to choose some instruments here because I do want to have multiple instruments for at least some of what I talk about here. So I'll have a flute and I'll have a piano. And then I am going to hit the next thing here so that I have an opportunity to talk through this process of choosing an initial time signature. And let me temporarily just lay this on top so I can be seeing the chat while I work the dialogue. So there we go. So I can pick the key signature and the time signature here. So let's go ahead and pick a time signature, all right? When I pick the time signature, you'll see you have a few choices here. First of all, you can pick, oh, you're not seeing my screen. Thank you, Nelson, sorry. I forgot to share my screen. I shouldn't say I never do that. I'm human, I mess things up all the time. All right, share screen, share, better, yes? Okay, so, let me just get out of that and get into here. Let me put this back to its normal size again. And here we go. Hey everyone, I think I'm back. I don't know what the heck just happened. Could be one of those days, apparently. So, hi everyone, I'm here again. And luckily, it seems like maybe it just sort of automatically got everyone back. But Peter, I see that you're here saying again. So, yeah, I got dumped out too. Don't know what happened, but whatever. All should be well now, so I would hope. So let me again try to do what I was doing. So I've again created a new score here. I'm in MuseScore. Yes, everyone got kicked out and we're all back now, so we're good. So Control N is how you create a new score or file new or however you like to create new scores. And then I'm going to choose instruments and I'm going to pick myself an oboe. I think I did flute last time, and a piano. And then I'm going to hit next. Often I just hit done because I get impatient, but here I specifically want to talk about the time signature setting. And so I click on the time signature icon here on this dial on this window here, and you'll see that I can either select an actual time signature with numbers, or I can pick the common time or cut time symbols. The common time symbol, I'll tell you that I never use, and I don't actually recommend it anymore. I mean, I feel like that symbol was used like up through, say, the 19th century, and now people just write 4/4. It's pretty rare in modern editions of or modern music to write the common time symbol. You'll see it in editions published 100 years ago. But the cut time symbol is definitely still used a lot. I just don't tend to write in cut time very often. So you can, in this spin boxes here, pick anything, right? You can do 7, 8, and you notice the denominator has to be a power of 2, right? 1, 2, 4, 8, because that's how time signatures normally work. So I can pick 7, 8, or whatever I want as my time signature. I'm going to go ahead and use 7, 8 just for grins. And then you can also choose your pickup here. So what if I want the pickup to be 3/8 notes long? Well, I can say create pickup and then pick 3/8 notes. So you're not limited. That would work even in 4/4, right? Even if you were in 4/4 and you wanted a beat and a half, well, that's 3/8 notes. So you can create a pickup of any length you want using that option there, the create pickup measure. All right. Now I can hit done because I'm not going to need anything else that I have here. All right, so I now have my score and it's in 7/8 and has a pickup measure. So let's get a couple things out of the way first that always come up. One of them is this pickup is possibly wrong. This is actually right in 7/8. I feel like in 7/8, this would be the right way to notate rests, because I would normally group 7/8 as 2/8 notes, 2/8 notes, 2/8 notes, 1/8 note. And so these would be the last 3/8. That would be the right way to notate it. But let me go ahead and just create another new score. And this one will be in 4/4, but we'll also have a 3/8 pickup. So this one will be for flute and organ instead of piano. And I will just let it be 4/4, but I'm also going to tell it I want a 3/8 pickup. 3/8. Now notice it's also giving me that same quarter rest eighth note. Here it is not correct. So let's talk about that, why this is a difference here. The pickup, the notation of the pickup should reflect the fact that these are in fact the last 3/8 of the measure, not the first 3/8. MuseScore doesn't understand that. When it sees a partial measure, it just doesn't know, hey, is this the first part of the measure or the second part of the measure? It should probably be able to figure out, because at the beginning of the piece, it's a pickup and it should do the other thing. It just doesn't. It's just not that smart. So we're going to have to enter any rests that we want. Like if I want, say, the organ to have rests and the flute to have pickups, I can enter my flute notes. Say I want eighth notes, G, A, B, and C. I can enter my eighth notes for the flute, but for the organ, I'm going to want to have the rests reflect the normal way the last 3/8 notes would be in 4/4 time. And the normal beaming would have that guy be the eighth note and that guy be the quarter. So what I just did was I selected that first rest, pressed 4 to change it into an eighth, and then I selected the second rest, pressed 5 to change it into a quarter. You can also then copy and paste that somewhere else. And Dave, you're absolutely right that 7/8 isn't always 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1. It just often is. 4 plus 3 is the most common way of parsing 7. It's not the only way, but it is the most common way. So this would be the right way to write those rests. Now, we also have an issue with the pickup in the flute, because if you were a flautist and saw that pickup there of 3/8 notes all beamed together, you would be totally excused for thinking, oh, that's probably a triplet and someone just left off the 3. You have no context to tell you it's not a triplet. Yes, there should have been a 3, but I think we've all seen music in which not every triplet gets a 3 on it, where it's just sort of assumed that when you see 3/8 beamed together, it's a triplet. It's a very common thing. If you think about, I always use the example of the Moonlight Sonata. It's nothing but triplets, right, in the right hand of the piano. And after the first measure, every editor who ever puts out an edition of that says, I'm tired of writing threes in. I'm not going to clutter up this score with threes on every triplet. I'm just going to let it be understood. So you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't beam 3/8 notes together. We should break the beam right in that same spot after the end of 3 going into 4. So I'm going to select that 8th note on 4. And then over here in the properties panel, I'll click where it says beam. And I'm going to click this icon here that says break beam left, meaning it's going to break the beam to the left of it. And so now that beam is broken, and now the pickup looks the way it should look. So managing the pickup is one of the things MuseScore does not do for you automatically as far as that goes, right? I mean, it created it for me automatically when I told it I wanted one, but it didn't manage the beaming or the rest. That's something you're going to have to do yourself when you create pickups, especially if that pickup is an odd length, like 3/8. So the other thing that MuseScore did do automatically, because I created the pickup when I first created the score, is it set it to not number that measure. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and just put a line break in after 4 measures. There's 1 measure, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll put in a line break right there. So measure 1, measure 2, measure 3, measure 4. This is measure 5 on the next system. So MuseScore has done for me the correct thing, which is not count the pickup as a measure. That's what you want. You want the pickup to not be counted as a measure. And if you specify the pickup when you first create the score, that happens automatically. If, on the other hand, you try to go back and create a pickup later, it's not going to automatically exclude it. The way you're going to have to exclude it is, let me just go ahead and create another score, yet another score that I'm going to create. And this time I'm going to do what I always do, which is get impatient and not go to that second screen of the wizard at all, and then go, oh, shoot, I forgot I want to pick up. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to enter my notes for 3/8 notes here. So there's my 3/8 notes. And then I can easily turn this measure into a pickup by selecting the rests that are left over and hitting Control-Delete or Command-Delete on a Mac. And now I have my 3/8 notes, and yeah, I can do the beaming thing that I want to do. Click the beam, break left. But it's unfortunately, if I put in my line break after 4 full measures, you'll see now it says measure 6 here. And that's because it is not excluding the pickup as it should be. So I need to tell MuseScore to exclude that pickup. I'm going to do that by right-clicking the pickup measure and going to Measure Properties, and then clicking this box that says Exclude from Measure Count, and then OK. I know this has come up a lot in the harmony course as people are working on your harmonizations of various different songs that have pickups. I've seen quite a few pieces that have pickups where you didn't do that step. You didn't do the step of excluding the pickup from the measure count, and therefore the measure numbers are just weird because I expect the first full measure to be 1. And so sometimes when I'm giving you comments, I'm thinking about what I think the measure number should be rather than what the measure number is showing in the score. So definitely be in the habit, if you create pickups, of doing that thing, excluding from the measure count. So that's one thing that always comes up when we deal with pickups is that you want to exclude it, and the other thing is you want to fix the beaming. So the other thing that comes up, and this has come up a couple times here in the cafe recently, and I get to go on my soapbox a little bit, but it's not that much of a soapbox. There is a convention, or I should say was a convention, say 300 years ago, that says when you have a pickup, you should shorten the last measure to kind of balance that pickup. And this was very common back in the 17th century, especially for like short dance forms where the music might repeat over and over again, and you kind of needed this repeat to go back to the beginning and is sort of add up to one full bar. It's also common in hymns, which will have that same structure of needing to repeat back to the beginning. And when repeating back to the beginning, you will want that last measure to be shortened so that when you go back to the beginning, those pickups complete the measure. So any short form that involves repeating the whole form, you want to use that convention of shortening the last measure. Any other music, don't do that. Do not shorten the last measure. It just ends up looking weird. But so for short pieces that are intended to repeat over and over again, and like the music that we're doing in the harmony course, a lot of these are short folk songs, and then we want to maybe repeat them multiple times. It's perfectly acceptable. By no means required, but perfectly acceptable to shorten the last one. But for any more significant works, don't shorten the last measure. So, Dave, I'll show you about the repeat measures in a moment. Okay. So I want to go ahead and just show how to do that shortening. It's really going to be the same thing here. Actually, what I can do is I can just go into, click that last measure, go to measure properties, and just tell it, hey, I want it to be 5/8 as the actual meter, the actual duration of that measure. And so now that measure is 5/8 notes long, and it correctly balances the first measure, which was 3/8 notes long. So again, if you want to use that style, which I will say I never use, even when I'm writing short form pieces, I just don't use that convention of shortening the last measure. If I need to put repeats on it, I will put repeats here. So I will put a repeat sign. I will add the pickup at the end of that last measure. I'll add another copy of the pickup there. And in fact, let's do that. Let's add another measure. Well, let's do it in another version of the score. I'm going to pick this score over here. And let me just shorten this score. I don't need all those measures. So if I wanted to create a repeating form, I would go to the palettes, go to the repeats palette, and add an end repeat at the end of the piece, add a start repeat after the pickup. And then I would make sure that my pickup is simply repeated here. This is the version where it's G, A, B. I have defined a shortcut for breaking beams. I don't use it very often. I just don't do enough of this sort of thing where I would need to. But I have defined shortcuts for it, but I can never remember what they are. I think it's Control and then comma, period, and slash for the various different beam commands. And I'm going to guess that Control comma is what I want. Nope. Control period is what did it. Control period is the shortcut I defined for that. So as I pretty much always do here, I want to show you, if you've never defined a shortcut, go to Edit, Preferences, Shortcuts. And then if you type beam into the search box, you'll see all the different beam commands, and you can see that Control comma is actually what I defined for join beams, and then Control period is break beams left, and Control slash is no beam. So that's what I had defined at some point. I just don't use them often enough to really remember which one is which. All right, so now let's come to Dave's question here about measure numbers around repeat bars. Let's say that there was going to be a first and second ending there, and then in the first ending, let's make that be a first ending, and then let this be a second ending. And then let's put in another line break so we can see. Actually, let's just put measure numbers on every measure. Let's do that. You can do that. I'm going to go to Format, Style, Measure Numbers, and then say interval 1. meaning every one measure. There used to be a convention of putting measure numbers every five measures, even though that means nothing musically. I strongly urge you never to do that. It's just going to confuse musicians to see measure numbers only on certain random looking measures. It's going to make those measures stand out in ways they shouldn't. So either put them on every measure or only at important points, or put them at the beginning of the system, which is the default. All right, so I now have measure numbers on every measure by setting that interval to 1. And by default, MuseScore will number the first and second ending individually. This is okay. It's totally okay. Some people will say this is bad. I'm not going to go that far, but I will say, yeah, we don't have to do that. So what I could do is exclude the second ending from the measure count. So I'm going to go to measure properties and exclude that second ending. So now there's like 10A and 10B, right? The first ending is measure 10, second ending doesn't get its own number, and then 11 picks up afterwards. This looks weird because now every other measure has a measure number and this one doesn't. So, so here's another thing I could do. If I wanted to see the 10 there, let me back up. If I wasn't showing measure numbers on every measure, I would be happy with this. Letting this be 10, letting that be basically another 10, and then 11 here. If I weren't showing measure numbers on every measure, this is how I would recommend doing it. But it does look weird to not have the measure number on that measure. So I think I can make that happen, and now we're going to find out. The second ending could be a different length. True, but the length of the second ending, let me come back to that, Stephen, because that's an interesting thing in itself. I want to see if this other thing I was going to try works. I'm going to go, what am I going to do? I'm going to go back to measure properties. So right click, measure properties, bar properties in the UK. And instead of saying exclude from measure count, I'm going to say add -1 to the measure number. So that way it still has a measure number. It's just going to be one less than it should be. When I do this, what I think is going to happen is it's going to be another measure 10, and I'm going to actually see the 10. And I'll hit apply to find out if I'm right. Ha, it worked. Yes. So that totally worked. Here's another thing I could have done. I'm going to reset that back to 0, go back to exclude, hit apply. No measure number, right? But see here where it says measure number mode auto? I can say always show and then hit apply. And now it shows as 11. And now I have two 11s. So that's not what I want in this case. But if there's a measure number that's not showing and you want it to show, know that that always show does do the trick. It's just not really what I wanted here because I really want this to be another measure 10, not another measure 11. So I'm going to go back to the way it was where I don't have that set to always show, but instead have -1 on add to measure number. So now I have two 10s. And now I want to address Stephen's comment, which is really an interesting and good one. First of all, I'm going to ask you a trick question here. How long is the second ending? How long is the second ending? Right now, it's infinite, or it's not infinite, it's unspecified. The norm is that if there's only two endings, the last ending is open-ended like this because it just continues. But what if it were actually a second ending and then a third ending, and then the second ending had its own repeat? And so now I want this to, let me get rid of that second ending here. I actually want a closed second ending. And that's something to be aware of. Let me select both measures, then add my second ending. The difference between the open and closed volta is meant to be you use a closed one anytime it actually ends at a repeat sign, and then the closing bracket lines up with the repeat. The final ending should be open-ended. So here, there's a third ending here, but it doesn't show as open-ended. If I go to more, do I see one? No. So I'm just going to have to modify the properties of this one to go to the properties panel and tell it I don't want an end hook. And now I get the non-end hook version. So now I have that going on. And now the question is, back to Stephen's question, well, now that the measure numbers aren't the same here, what do I want to do? Or the length of these things are not the same. What do I want to do? And what I want to do is cry. I hate this. So I think at this point, I would not try to play games with the measure numbers. I would just go back to the defaults and let this be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, etc. I would keep it simple because I think anything else you try to do is likely to cause more confusion. That's my gut feel about that. I think it would be more confusing to, I mean, I could say this is 10, then this is 10, and that's 11, and then this is 10 again, and then this is 11. I could do that. Let's do it. Let's see what it looks like. I'm going to go to measure properties, and then since I want that third ending to be back to measure 10, I'm going to subtract 2 from its measure number and say apply. There you go. I've got 3 10s now and 2 11s, and then the measure numbering continues with 12. I don't like it. I don't like it, but no doubt some people publishing music have done this. I'm just not a fan personally. So then Peter's asking, would you ever put in a B, a letter A, and a letter B on those measure numbers? Yeah, you could. You totally could. I've seen it. I've absolutely seen it. Ideally, you might be able to edit this measure number to customize its text, but there isn't an option for that. There's not an option to customize the measure number text. So what I would do is instead of adding, well, yeah, if you add staff text, it'll appear only on that staff. What I really want to add is system text so that it will appear on every staff in the parts, but still only on the top staff in the score. So I'm going to use Control-Shift-T and enter 10B. And now I will maybe turn off the display of the real measure number here. So in measure properties, I will now say measure number mode always hide. And now I only have the 10B here and not the original 10. And then I'm going to come over to the properties panel and scroll all the way down, and where it says more, I'm going to change the text style. So this was system text, but I'm going to change it to measure number style. And now it looks like a measure number. It's not going to necessarily be positioned exactly the same, right? These are left aligned to the bar line. This is left aligned to where the first beat would happen. So you know, if you want to get really fancy with it, you could move it over a couple staff spaces or maybe 1.5 staff spaces or whatever feels like it gives you about the right position. But in any case, you can totally do that. Yeah, and Dave, this observation is one reason why I don't like playing games with measure numbers or rehearsal letters or anything like that. The moment you get into a situation where you have parts that have differently numbered measures or differently lettered rehearsal marks because you're trying to save a little paper by not writing out a repeat for someone, but do write it out for someone else, or whatever games you're trying to play that cause the measure numbers to get out of sync from one part to another. Yeah, it wastes so much time in rehearsal where to try to realize that two different people have different measure 73, and measure 73 in one person's part does not correspond to measure 73 in someone else's part. And yeah, unfortunately, I've definitely seen that happen. So I don't like playing games with measure numbers, because you can get yourself into trouble. But in any case, there's your 10B. Kind of made it happen, right? All right. So I've spent more time talking about pickups and measure numbering and less time talking about the time signatures themselves. But what the heck? That's, you know, this is an informal session, and I'm really happy for the discussion here. This is really kind of useful. I am, though, going to flip back to my 7/8 score and just talk about this guy a little bit and say, well, what if instead of 7/8, I want it to actually show 4 + 3 / 8? which is a common way that you might want to indicate what those groupings are. So first of all, I'm going to right click it and go to time signature properties. And notice that the default beaming is not that. The default beaming here is 3, 2, and 2. And I don't want that. I want it to be 4 and then 3. So I'm going to click this guy to join that, click this guy to break that, and then click that one to join that. Now, do I really want 3/8 notes beamed together, or do I want one of them all by itself? I don't know. I'm going to let, that's going to depend on your music, what you're doing. But this is actually pretty common to have 7/8 beamed this way. If you're going to have your 7/8 beamed this way, notice this checkbox that says also change shorter notes. You probably want that because notice the 16ths didn't update. When I updated my eighths, the 16ths didn't update. But if I check the also change other notes button and then redo those same changes, now I have my 16th notes beamed the same way. And then I could also choose to maybe break up my 16th as 3 and 3 or 4 and 2 or whatever. But if you check also change shorter notes before fiddling with your eighths, the 16ths and 32nds will automatically update to reflect it, and then you can customize further. So anyhow, that's that. But what if you want the time signature to actually reflect that 4 plus 3 grouping? You can do that. You can put 4 plus 3 over 8 here in the text field, 4 plus 3 over 8. And now when I press OK, you're going to actually see 4 plus 3 over 8. Now notice that when I did that time signature properties, it only did the oboe part. I want to show you a trick. This trick sometimes works and sometimes might require me to get a little fancier, but I'm going to try the following. I'm going to Control Shift drag that time signature down to the next staff. Control Shift drag is the same shortcut we use to customize palettes. It's the same way that we would customize the palette. So if I wanted this 4 plus 3 over 8 to be on my palette, I could Control Shift drag it over to the palette. But if I don't really want it on my palette because I'm just using it for this one score, if I Control Shift drag this to another staff, it will update that staff. I think it only does if it recognizes that it's sufficiently different, because I think it tries to compare, is the new and old signature the same? And I think it's the fact that I changed the text that caused it to work. And if I had only changed the beaming, it wouldn't, or vice versa. Or maybe that was only in MuseScore 3. I don't remember. But now I can do the same thing to copy it down here. So time signatures can be copied with Control Shift drag. This is really good to know about. And I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I do want to come back to, Susan. That's a really interesting comment. So there's a specific set of guidelines here about this. So don't count the first ending, only count the last in a set. Interesting. So, yeah, so I'm sure different publishers, different organizations have their own guidelines for such things. And yeah, by all means, use the guidelines that apply the most to your setting. So if you're writing choral music, you probably want to learn what the major choral publishers do. If you're writing symphonic music, you want to see what the major symphonic music publishers do, etc. The thing is, my world is jazz and piano music, and we don't tend to use measure numbers at all. Measure numbers are mostly there for ensemble music, and so therefore solo piano music, we don't tend to use measure numbers. And in jazz, we don't tend to use them. We use them sometimes, but rehearsal letters are that much more common in jazz. So I don't have a super clear sense from my own experience of my own preference. I'm just queasy about messing with measure numbers too much. But yeah, that's great to know that there's published guidelines from the Chamber Music Conference. All right, so take a look at that 4 plus 3 over 8. This thing here is it's basically a 7/8 measure where I've got grouped in terms of 4 and 3, but it's still all one measure, right? If I start to enter some notes here, whoops. enter eighth note, C, 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 D, D, D. Sometimes when people have these sort of asymmetric time signatures, the term that's sometimes used is irregular. For that also, that term bothers me mathematically a little bit, but or irrational. They'll say irrational, which is absolutely, pi is irrational. 7/8 is not irrational. In fact, 7/8 is the very definition of rational. Fractions are rational. Anyhow, that's just a little pet peeve. Some people would rather have alternating measures of 4/8 and 3/8 rather than seeing one measure that long. So let's take a look at how to do that. MuseScore doesn't have an easy way of doing it, but we can use that Control-Shift-Drag trick. So I'm going to add myself a 4/8 right here, and I'll just drag it. And this time I'll select a measure and 3/8. So I've got a 4/8 measure and a 3/8 measure. Now I'm going to play leapfrog. Control-Shift-Drag. When I did the Control-Shift-Drag, it unfortunately only affects that staff. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to not play leapfrog. I'm just going to use the 4/8. I'm just going to have to keep doing this. 4/8, 3/8, 4/8. And, I'm just going to have to keep doing that as many times as I need to, for my score. No one likes that. No one loves this. No one loves the fact that to have alternating time signatures like that, there's no better way than to just manually set it all up. And someday, yes, we'll have a way where you can copy and paste a section here and it will paste the time signatures along with it. Everyone agrees that's a feature MuseScore should have. Someday, no doubt it will. But right now, there is not a better direct way. So, Dave, one step ahead of me. Good job. No matter how you get this into your score, and there are some tricks. I will talk about a trick for this in a moment. But I don't like seeing all those time signatures there. You're absolutely right about that. So the norm that would happen then is that we would hide them all, either individually by selecting them and pressing V like that, or you can do that. You can right click one time signature and then say select. Oh, you know what? With time signatures, I was hoping there would just be a select similar, but because there's multiple ones selected, it's making me go to more here. But then I can still say just OK. And now all the time signatures are selected, and I can go to properties and just set them all to be invisible. And then I can come back to the initial one and make just the initial one visible. So now I've got all these invisible time signatures, and then as Dave was also suggesting, make the interior ones dotted in the middle of that. So yeah, you can totally select that guy and then go to, well, I think in properties, I can say I want it to be dotted. And now do that every other measure, right? You can totally do this. It's not fun, but you can totally do it. And now also, I'm going to have nothing selected and turn off the display of invisible items just so I can see a little better if this looks good. And it does look good. The rest are centered here. And you mentioned that they should be slightly offset, but of course these measures are empty and they just have measure rests in them. If I actually put notes in them, then it will be offset, right? It'll be offset as expected. Only empty measures will be off. If you want to fake that for a completely empty measure and make the first half a little wider, well, first of all, you shouldn't use full measure rests in that case at all. I would have to come in here and go in and say something more reasonable, like make that be a half rest and make this be a quarter rest and an eighth rest. So, you might have to play some games like that and then copy this down here. So, so yeah, you could totally do that. Now, this thing that I just did of like having to manually do all of this business here to create that, if I were doing this kind of music a lot, that would drive me absolutely batty. And as it does for anyone who does this kind of music, and that's why people really want to see this feature of being able to, copy and paste time signatures, basically. But if I needed to do it, what I would do is I would write that in ABC. ABC is a text-based music notation system, and there's kind of a plugin, but it kind of doesn't work very well in MuseScore 4 because of the way multiple scores are handled. But if I enable the ABC import plugin, enable it, and then return to my score, actually, it's going to have to give me a new score. I'm not going to use this for this score, but I'm going to go to the ABC plugin. And now if you learn the ABC language, which doesn't really take that long, M 4 8, and then I can put in I've forgotten enough. I've forgotten too much. Z is a rest. Gosh darn it. I should know this. And then M 3 8, and then Z, and then copy and paste this business. This whole, whoops, copy and paste it a few times. With any luck, when I then say import this thing, it would import it. Now, what happens for real is it doesn't really import it. It saves it to a special folder that I then have to go navigate to. That's just a limitation of the plugin framework. And unfortunately, I don't have an easy way to deal with that right now. Because of the way my system is set up, that folder is not one I can easily get to. But if I could, I would open that folder and then open that file, and it would show me the thing. So I think I can get there if I go to, yeah, it's complicated. Ooh, I don't know why I'm doing this here, but only because it's a cafe and I do random things, right? I think I can copy temp 1.6 blah 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 and copy this to my scores folder. Documents, scores, test. Oh, documents, MuseScore 4, scores, test. I probably have the Z thing wrong. I feel like the Z thing was wrong. But now I can open that file that the ABC import just created, and I will see this file show up here. And if I got my syntax even close to correct, it will, the file, once it finally shows up here and I can open it, it will have those time signatures already set up for me. So that's a thing. That is totally a thing. It's, try this again, test. My test folder doesn't want to load right now for some reason. There we go. Now I can open the file. And let's see what it looks like. See if I got even close to right. Ah, there you go. I have it kind of close to right. What did I forget? I forgot the bar lines. I forgot the bar lines in my ABC. So in my ABC that I had going there, is that window still open? No. I should have put vertical bars at the end of those Z's. But in any case, you can see that if you learn a little bit of ABC, then you can create this sort of stuff. But that is now all showing as one big measure because I left out the bar line. Well, that's kind of clever too. So anyhow, ABC is kind of a interesting little technology to know about. It can allow you to put some things into notation that would be really kind of hard to do otherwise, and then you can use that system to import. And Marla, yeah, so if you have no need to do these alternating weird time signatures, then there's no reason to be following this at all. On the other hand, if you ever do have a need to do that alternating time signature thing, the thing that I'm talking about is called ABC notation. ABC notation. Google it. The cool thing about ABC notation is I first learned about it because of a blind student I had. This was before MuseScore had any screen reader support, and she didn't really know Braille music well. I certainly didn't know it at all, and and even if either of us did, we didn't have an easy way to write it. So we were looking for ways that we could communicate notated music without, given the fact that there was no notation software. So we did some research, and ABC is what came up. And it's a really interesting notation system. Like here, I'm going to type into the chat. Ding. No, I'm just going to go like this. Dum, bum, 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 bum. There. So that's readable, right? I mean, you don't have to take a lot of training to learn that notation right there. It's just you put the letter names, and there's numbers that indicate duration, and there's symbols you put in. I put M:48, meaning the meter is 48. So it's a whole system of how you can use just plain text to represent music. And then there's a plugin that will then convert that to music XML, and then you can load that music XML file into MuseScore. So it's a useful system to know about for a variety of reasons. My initial reason for learning it was to work with this blind student, and it worked fabulously. Back in 2010, before MuseScore had any accessibility features, before MuseScore was even released, actually, before MuseScore 1 was released, I was giving her homework assignments written in ABC, and then her screen reader was just reading the text. And then she would complete her homework assignments by typing into a word processor or a text editor of whatever kind. She would just type in the ABC, and then I would just read the ABC. There's also programs out there that can convert the ABC to standard notation without going through MuseScore. So it's a really interesting system to know about, but its original reason for existence had nothing to do with computers and had nothing to do with blind people. It was a guy backpacking through the Scottish backcountry who wanted to jot down some folk songs that he heard along the way, and he kind of read music a little bit, but not really, as the story goes. And so he just invented his own music notation system with text because he was a computer programmer, and working in terms of text made sense to him. So he invented his own music notation system where he could write down folk songs that he learned while backpacking on a piece of paper without needing manuscript paper or anything like that. And that's how it got invented. But now it's actually very big in that world, the world of Scottish and Irish folk songs. So if you go to various websites that specialize in Irish folk songs especially, you will often see them offered in ABC format. So anyhow, that's a big digression into the world of ABC, but I don't know, that's kind of what these cafes are about, digressions into different topics that don't otherwise, tend to get talked about. So what else can I tell you about time signatures? Do we have other questions about time signatures? Dave is mentioning about a Chinese notation, Jianpu is what it's called. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. And it is based on numbers, and it's kind of text-based, but I think it's done in a way that doesn't quite as easily allow you to just type it. But I could be wrong. But I sort of think there needs to be some formatting associated with it. But I don't know Jianpu well enough. But but yeah, it is definitely very common in China. Oh, there is a guy who has written, there was a plugin that would attempt to convert MuseScore into Jianpu, and it's spelled like this. There was a guy who created a plugin that would try to convert MuseScore into Jianpu, and it was somewhat successful. But now there's someone working on actually putting in native Jianpu support into MuseScore. It seems like he's not going to get it into 4.2. He's got a lot of code written, but there's some issues and reasons why it seems like it's not ready yet. But it does seem like it's going to happen. It does seem like it's going to happen, that there will be native support for Jianpu in MuseScore at some point. And I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that at all correctly. Okay, so there's one other thing to talk about. Well, there's a lot of other things, but one could talk about with time signatures. I have already, let me go back to one of my other scores here, one of my simpler scores. I didn't really talk about the actually changing time signature within a score other than that complicated back and forth thing. But certainly I can select a measure and go to the time signatures palette and say 3/4, and then it changes from 4/4 to 3/4 at that point. You can also say, hey, if I just want to have 3 measures here, well, let me say I want these next 4 measures to be in 4/4. Watch what happens. I'm going to select those 4 measures and click the 4/4. It automatically puts a 4/4 at the beginning and then automatically restores the 3/4 at the end. But notice I had selected 4 measures, and now there's only 3 here. Well, that's because I selected 4 measures of 3, meaning I selected 12 beats. 12 beats is only 3 measures of 4/4. So MuseScore does all this calculation for you automatically. Colin, thank you for that link there. Oh, is this? I'm really curious, but I'm afraid to click the link right now because that's might be how I got myself into trouble. It seems like sometimes I've gotten myself into trouble by clicking links in chats, and that has led to hanging up a session before. So I'm not going to, like that might be why we hung up before, but I didn't click a link. Anyhow, I will be checking that out because I'm quite curious about it. So in any case, you can, change time signatures anywhere you want within a score. You can also then delete time signature changes. Say, oh, I didn't want to change to 4/4 after all. Let me just select that thing and press delete to get rid of it, right? So you can work with time signatures to at least some extent, just like anything else. Just like anything else, you can add them, delete them. And we've already seen that when I went to right-click that thing, time signature properties, we could change the default beaming. So if you want your 3/4 beamed 4+2 like that, we can do it. And now if I enter some eighth notes, I keep forgetting to enter eighth notes. You'll see that they are now beamed 4+2. So the other thing there's so many things that one could talk about, but there's one other kind of random thing I definitely wanted to show here, and that is a convention that is common in film music, where instead of showing time signatures on the staff like this, they're displayed extra large and between the staves. So I'm going to quickly show you kind of sort of how you would do that. There's kind of a lot to this, but with the time signature selected, if I then go to the properties panel, you'll see there's scale here, and I can change the vertical scale to be taller. And if I literally make it 200%, I could have just typed 200 in there. You now see it looking like that. And then I can also go to the appearance panel and the appearance part of the properties panel and change that vertical offset to push them between the staves. We would then also need to make sure there's enough space between staves to accommodate that. But so I've just, done that much of making them big. And I would then also have to go to Format, Style, Page, and increase the minimum staff distance to get more space between my staves so that those things look reasonable, right? So that's how you can do a style of time signatures that is commonly done in film scores. And I think it's done in film scores because there's often a lot of time signature changes so that the music can sync up exactly perfectly with the action. So it's really common for there to be lots of time signature changes. It's also really common for this music basically to just be recorded sight reading. You go into the studio, the composer puts out the music, you record it in one take, and then it gets edited later in post-processing or whatever. But the live musicians are only in the studio for a brief period of time because time is money. And so this allows the conductor to easily see the time signature changes and the players to possibly have an easier time of it also. So so there you go. That's some more interesting things about time signatures to know about. And yeah, there's tons more about time signatures in my course. So plug alert in the Mastering MuseScore course. You can learn much more about time signatures, 2 or 3 lessons just on that subject, and then others on pickup measures and all the other things that we've talked about here. So I feel like I've said my piece here, said what I want to say, and anything else, if I tried to start getting into now, would get us off into some whole other tangent, and I don't need to do that. So what I'm going to do instead is start just talking up tomorrow's session of the Music Masterclass. So we're going to be talking about augmented sixth chords. That'll be the main topic. We'll see what else comes up, but augmented sixth chords. And so that was, if you looked at the tip that, or the theory article that I posted in the newsletter this week, I was talking about these approaches to 5, right? So let me just use my keyboard here, and you'll use your ears because you won't see my hands. But we could have 4 to 5 to 1, right? And I talked about all the other versions, 1, 6, 4 to 5 to 1. The one that we're going to be talking about tomorrow is the augmented sixth chord, which is flat 6 dominant to 5 to 1. And there's all sorts of variations of how that works and the different way it's voiced and how it's spelt, and lots of details about that is covered in the harmony course. But in any case, that is the sound we are going to be exploring in Music Masterclass, and it's really the last of the individual sounds that we're covering in this course. We talked about secondary, inversions and secondary dominants and diminished chords and borrowed chords, right? This is kind of the last specific type of chord, and then everything else we'll talk about is more making use of this information. But it's a really interesting sound that is just really useful and can add a lot of color to your music when you get inside that. So that's what we'll be looking at tomorrow, and hope you're able to make it for the Music Masterclass. So let me return to my theme music here and play myself out. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for all the discussion. And yeah, it's been an interesting session to me because I had no idea where I was going to go with it, and ended up going to places that I didn't even know I wasn't going to go, or did, so even though I didn't know where I was going to go, I still surprised myself. So hopefully there were things of interest to different people here. And again, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the masterclass. Next week will be our score of the week. And so I'll just be entering some music into MuseScore and seeing what comes up in the process. So that's what's happening next week. And yeah, that's what I can tell you. So again, thanks for the comments. Thanks for the questions. And I will see you next time.